Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And I'm starting down the path to MIT AppInventor2. And I think I've resolved the problems I had logging in. And as you can see, I've already got a bunch of projects created, but I'm going to come in here and act as though I don't have any projects whatsoever. So I'm just going to do a projects, start new project, because that's typically what you're going to do anyway. Alright? I will tell you that the first time you log in and you do this, you're probably going to get a message from App Inventor that says that there's a bunch of stuff that you have to install. Now, when I say a bunch of stuff, it really isn't that way. But what you should do is you should go to their main page, and under their main page, all right, there is information in here. In fact, I'll just back up. Now, of course, it's going to be different if you're not using Windows, okay? But they have instructions in here for Windows, and there's another set of instructions that are in there that are for Mac or Apple, and there's another set that are for Linux, Starnix, Unix, whatever you want to call it. But if you're doing the setup through Windows, you download the installer. That's a hyperlink to it. I've already got it downloaded, so I'm not going to click that. It comes up. You save it typically to your downloads folder, or you can tell it to run when it gets done, etc. And then I'm going to recommend that you at least start by setting up the emulator. All right. When you run the emulator, actually when you do all this setup, what you're going to have, and let me just show you this, is on your C drive, or whatever your home drive is, all right, it'll create a folder that's called App Inventor. And what's in there? Well, there is an uninstall, there is a license agreement, there are some commands for App Inventor, which I'm not going to go over, and I don't even know what most of them are, and as of right now at least don't care. But this one is really important, this AIStarter.exe. When you double click that file, you should really do that before you even get into App Inventor. All right, because what that will do is it literally runs, and mine's been, don't worry about it, yours is going to look just like this without any of this stuff. I've had the emulator on and off all day, and that's why I think I've got all this stuff in there. But it's just about 5 lines long. Platform is Windows, App Inventor tools are located here. So it's basically a batch file, whatever you want to call it, an executable file that's going to start everything running. All right. And then once you've got that up and going, and again, you can get all that information out under the setup, okay? And once you get started with all of that stuff, all right, then eventually you're going to be here and you're going to be right there. So I've already got a project called All American, but I'm going to recreate it, okay? It's an unbelievably simple project, but it's going to allow me to show you the main components of App Inventor 2. So let's just call this AA2 for All American 2. All right, so there it is. And it brings up, so this is our App Inventor 2 interface. And it may or may not look like it, but it's broken up into 4 areas. There's an area here, there's an area here, there's an area here, and there's an area here. So let's start by talking about each one of those 4 areas. This first area is referred to typically as the palette, okay? And it's a list of the different components you've got available to you. So right now, if I wanted to put a button in my what's called my viewer here, I would just hold my left mouse button down and drag it over. Again, we'll get to that in due time. Don't worry about that at all. It's fine. All right, you can see there's checkbox, date picker, a lot of the tools that you typically have. The ones I'm going to use the most often from this list, all right, is I'll go over virtually all of them, but the ones I'm going to be most concerned with at the beginning will be what? They'll be the button, the image control, the label, and the text box. Probably those 4 more than anything else. And once we get into it a little bit, the web viewer as well. All right, so those are your user interface tools there. Underneath that, you've got what are called the layout tools, where you can have a horizontal arrangement, a horizontal arrangement with scrolling, a table arrangement, a vertical arrangement, and a vertical scroll arrangement. All right? Now, when we do this first project in just a minute, I'm going to create a horizontal arrangement, and hopefully you'll see why, and it'll make sense in just a couple minutes after that. Next, we've got the media section. All right? And we've got, notice you can hook it up to a camcorder, a camera, etc. What we're going to be most concerned with in or out of this area, at least to start with, what we're going to be most concerned with are sound and text-to-speech. Okay? Will we go over the rest of them? We may go over some of them. Okay. Drawing and animation. You'll notice there's only 3 things in here. And 2 of them, the ball and the image sprite, are both dependent upon a canvas. So if you want to put a ball on the screen, or you want to put any kind of image sprite, we'll look at that when we go through the whack-a-mole example later on. You have to first put a canvas down, and then you can add your ball or your image sprite or both, but you need a canvas first. Then you've got some sensors. All right, I haven't even used all these. Notice there's a pedometer in here, there's an accelerometer in here, there's a gyroscope sensor, there's a lot of different things. There's even an orientation sensor, so if you were going to create a game and you wanted to allow the user to have different views when it was portrait as opposed to landscape, for example, you might use that. There's a social link here, and you'll notice that it's hooked up to Twitter, and you can set it up for where you create your own email list, contact list, etc., phone number list. Okay. Storage. This is a little bit confusing, but what we're talking about here, more than anything else, is we're talking about persistent storage. So the idea that maybe you want to, maybe you're going to create a game, and you want to be able to have a list of the high scores or something like that. And you'll notice there's files for regular files, the Fusion Tables control, which I have not used, TinyDB and TinyWebDB. The difference between TinyDB, DB short for database, and TinyWebDB is if I am going to create something where I need a database, and I'm the only one who's going to need to access the database, I'm going to use TinyDB because it's less complex. But on the other hand, if I'm going to create a game, and let's say that I want to create a game where I'm going to have 2 different people will be able to play against each other on different computers at the same time, and I want to be able to keep track of who wins, etc., then I'm going to use the TinyWebDB. So if you're talking about working with more than one user, it'd be the TinyWebDB. All right, we've got connectivity. So notice Bluetooth and web, all right, and the activity starter, which we'll get to at another time. Lego Mindstorms. Now, I don't know anything about Legos. I mean, I know what Legos are, but you can actually do some programming with Lego robots. Okay. The experimental, that's got Firebase. It's another database. Not going to talk about that, at least not right now. And extensions, we'll talk about that at another time. Okay. So the two we're going to be most concerned with in this first project are the layout and the user interface. But before we do either of those, let's just take a quick look at what else is up here. All right. Well, we already talked about this, and we mentioned that, again, this is your palette, this is your viewer. All right, the viewer is where you place the different components, and you arrange them, whatever way you want them to look. All right, it's the equivalent, if you've ever worked with, for example, C#, where you're writing on a form, something like that. It's not the exact same thing, but it's equivalent. It's fairly equivalent. All right. Next, we have what are called the components list. And you'll notice that as we add things, so notice if I just were to drag a button over, I'm going to get rid of it right away. But if I drag a button over, notice how that changes and it gets added to the component list. And I can immediately rename it if I want to, or I can delete it, which is what I want to do in this case. So the component list lists all the components in your project, okay? And it is a way that you can go back and forth between the components also. Now, under the component list, you have what's called your media. I don't know if it's a media tag or what, but basically what it does is it allows you to go and upload files. We'll get to that at a later time. And then finally, you've got your properties. Your properties will change depending upon what component is listed. All right? And not like this is a big thing, but I want you to realize, if you notice that this says screen 1, if I click rename, nothing happens. You cannot rename your main screen on here. It's called screen 1. I'm sure there was a reason for doing that, but I'm not exactly sure what it is. All right? Okay, so I'm going to attempt in the next couple minutes to very quickly create that first project. And I want to keep this down to about 5 minutes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a layout. And I'm going to create what's called a horizontal layout. Whoops, not like that. I'm going to create a horizontal layout, so I'm going to click on here, click and drag, and I'm going to put that right here. I'm not going to do any explaining of this. I'm going to build it, and then in the next lecture, I'm going to explain everything I did. All right? I'm going to add 3 buttons right now. So I'm going to open up my user interface. I'm going to add the first button. And this can be real quirky the way that it works. Okay, just so you're aware of that. This can be quirky with the way that it works. So I'm going to come in and add a second button. And I'm going to almost put it right on top of the first one. You want to make sure that they're both under your horizontal arrangement. And I'm going to go and I'm going to create a third button. Again, whoops, see, that's not what I wanted to have happen. So it took the third one, and it actually was not part of the horizontal arrangement. So I'm going to delete that one. All right, I'm going to come back again, and I did the same darn thing. Okay, so there's my 3 buttons. Now, I'm going to keep this real simple. I'll make changes to this in the next lecture, but for right now, with my buttons, I want to do a couple things. First, I want to come in here. You should get used to, as soon as you create a control, just rename it right away. Come up with some kind of a structure you're comfortable with. I'm going to use BTN, the old Microsoft way of doing it. I'm going to call this BTN red, because it's going to be my red button. I'm going to call this one BTN blue. I'm sorry, BTN white. And I'm going to call the last one BTN blue. And you'll notice, as soon as I change their names here, those changes are reflected immediately, all right, in my components window. Now, I only have one horizontal arrangement, so I'm not going to change the name of that, although I could. All right, I'm going to go back here to the text for my button, and I'm going to change it, because text for button 1 sounds kind of silly, so I'm just going to put red there. You notice the button size shrinks. That's okay. Then I'm going to go to my second button, and I'm going to change the text on that one to white. And I'm going to go to the third one, and I'm going to change the text on that one, and I'm going to change it to blue. All right. So I now have my 3 buttons. Now, it looks kind of bad the way that they exist right now. So what I'm going to very quickly do is I'm going to click on the first button. I'm going to come over and I'm going to say for the height, I'm going to leave it automatic. But for the width, I'm going to tell it that I want it to fill up 33% of, well, 32% of the screen. And if you don't know why, watch while I keep doing this. So there's the first one. Then I'm going to go to the white one, and I'm going to do the same thing. So for the width, I'm going to say I want it to fill up 32% of the screen. And then finally for the blue one, I'm going to come over, and for the width, I'm going to tell it that I want it to fill up 32% of the screen. All right, and now it pretty much looks the way that it should. You don't really want to go to 100%. I probably could have even gone less than this. All right, because otherwise it overhangs and it can look a little funky. All right, so now I've done what? I've changed the name of my buttons, and I've changed what's on the button's face. If I wanted to, I could come over here and, for example, I can bold it so it stands out a little more. So I could bold all 3 of these. Okay? All right. Now, what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of code. This window right here, we're in the designer right now. We are in the designer. All right? What I want to do is I want to go into what's called the blocks editor. This is where you write your code. We're going to have some time where we're going to talk about all this stuff. But I want to drag out my red button. And this says when you click this button, what do you want to do? Well, what I want to have happen is I want my screen to change color. So you can look at it like when button red is clicked, do this. So what do I want to do? Well, I want screen 1, that's screen. I want what? I want to find, there should be something in here that says background color, and there it is. So I want to set the background color. And you'll notice, you may or may not be able to hear this, but it's kind of like putting puzzle pieces together. And it clicks right in. Well, what do I want to set it to? Well, it's the red button. So when I click it, I want the background screen to go red. So I can click on colors, and I can choose red. So let's take a look at what I've just done. I put code in here that says for my red button's click event, I'm saying when it's clicked, what I want to have happen is I want you to set the background color for my screen, which is my form or whatever you want to call it, set it to red. Well, let's go and see exactly what happens when we do that. All right, now this may take a little bit of time, so probably what I'm going to have to do is, I'm getting close to the end right now here anyway, because I'm at 15 or 16 minutes already. So when we come back, I'm going to start up the emulator. It's running here, but I have to say connect emulator. All right, and this may take a little bit of time. Well, maybe it won't. Ideally, it'll come up very quickly. It has a bunch of stuff that it's loading in the background. Again, as I told you, not a hardware guy. So exactly what's happening in the background, don't know. To be honest with you, don't really much care. All right. So it says waiting 16, etc. And it does not mean that when it gets to 13 more seconds, it'll be done. It goes through a bunch of different cycles at times, at least. All right. But my goal in here was to start to build the first application and show you something in action, so to speak. It still isn't up. When it's up, this screen is going to look just like this screen. There. Nope. This is the emulator. It's supposed to be a phone. Now, the only code we put in was for red. So notice if I click blue, nothing happens. If I click white, nothing happens. If I click red, the screen turns red. All right, I'm going to stop right now, and I'm going to come back and change and fix, or I should say, finish the program, and then we're going to discuss it in depth. We'll do that in just a couple minutes.